She was sold as a mail-order bride, but her groom had a dead wife's secret. She was already on the train when she found out the man who sent for her might still be in love with a ghost. Not a ghost from a story. A real woman. A dead woman, whose name was still carved into the headboard of the bed Clara was supposed to sleep in. But we'll get to that. My name is Clara Weston, and if you had told me at 29 years old that I would be sitting in a rattling train car with everything I owned stuffed into one carpet bag, heading to a ranch in Montana to marry a man I had never met, I would have told you that only desperate women do things like that. I was desperate. If you are someone who has ever felt like the world moved on without you, like everyone around you found their place, and you were the only one still standing at the edge wondering if there was a place for you anywhere, then this story is for you. And before we go any further, if you love slow, emotional Western romance stories about healing, belonging, and love that feels real, you are in the right place. Leave a comment below and tell me where you are watching from. And if you are new here, please subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Now, back to Clara. She had grown up in a boarding house in St. Louis, the daughter of a seamstress who died of fever when Clara was 11. After that, she moved from one aunt's home to another. Always a little too much trouble, always a little too much expense. By the time she was 18, she was working in a laundry. By 20, she was a schoolteacher's assistant. And by 29, she had saved enough money to survive for maybe 3 months if she was careful. She had almost married once. A merchant's son named Gerald, who had held her hand in church and told her she was the kind of woman a man builds a life with. She had believed him. She had given him her savings to help with a business venture, and 3 weeks later, he was gone. The money was gone. The promises were gone. And Clara was left standing in the middle of her small rented room, wondering what exactly it was about her that made people feel so comfortable leaving. So when she saw the advertisement in the back of the church bulletin, placed by a matchmaking service called Heartland Connections, she did not laugh at it the way her neighbor Martha did. She read it twice, then she read it again. Rancher in Silver Creek, Montana. Widower. 1 child. Age 5. Looking for a woman of steady character and warm heart to share quiet life. No pretense. No false promises. Simple honesty required. Simple honesty. She had not had a lot of that in her life, but she understood what it felt like to want it. She wrote back. The rancher's name was Eli Holt. His letters were short. Not cold, but careful, like a man measuring every word before he let it leave his hand. He told her about the ranch. He told her about the winters. He told her about his daughter, Rose, who was 5 and had not spoken a full sentence since her mother passed 8 months ago. He did not say much about himself except that he was 34, that he worked hard, and that he needed someone steady. Clara wrote back and told him she was steady. It was the truest thing she had ever said about herself. They exchanged 4 letters. Then he sent train fare and a date. And Clara packed her bag. She told herself it was practical. A roof, a purpose, a child who needed someone. That was enough. That was more than she had now. She did not let herself think about love. Love was the kind of thing that made you hand over your savings to a man named Gerald. The train ride took 2 days. She slept sitting up, her carpet bag held between her feet, watching the land outside the window change from crowded brick buildings to open sky, rolling hills, then finally to something vast and quiet and so different from everything she had ever known that it made her chest ache in a way she could not explain. When she stepped off the train in Silver Creek, Montana, the air smelled like pine and cold earth, and something else she did not have a word for yet. Later she would learn that smell was simply space. The smell of a place where the world had not been pressed together until it forgot how to breathe. He was waiting at the edge of the platform. Eli Holt was not what she expected. She was not sure what she had expected exactly. Maybe someone older, rougher, more worn around the edges. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair going a little gray at the temples, and a jaw that looked like it had been cut from the same stone as the mountains behind him. He wore a coat that had seen better days and boots caked with honest mud, and he held his hat in both hands the way a man does when he is trying to be respectful. He looked at her like he was trying to figure something out. She looked at him the same way. "Miss Weston," he said. His voice was low and even like the land he lived on. "Mr. Holt," she said. They shook hands. That was all. He loaded her bag into the wagon without asking, and she climbed up on the seat without waiting to be helped, and they rode the 12 miles to the ranch in almost complete silence, which should have been uncomfortable, but somehow was not. He pointed out things along the way. That ridge there is good for watching storms come in. There's a creek just past those cottonwoods, runs clear all year. The town's small, but the people are decent mostly. She listened. She watched the land. It was big, bigger than any picture her mind had ever made of Montana, and quiet in a way that felt like something healing. The ranch house came into view just before sunset. It was not grand. It was honest, plain wood with a porch that ran the full length of the front, a barn standing solid to one side, a garden that needed work along the other. Smoke came from the chimney. The windows were lit from inside with the kind of warm light that makes a building look like it is alive. She thought, despite everything, this could be a home. Then she walked inside, and she saw the portrait. It hung on the wall just inside the front door. A woman, painted in soft colors, dark-eyed and beautiful, with a small smile that made her look like she was keeping a gentle secret. She wore a blue dress. Her hands were folded in her lap. Below the portrait, on the narrow table against the wall, there was a single candle burning. A candle, still burning. Clara stood very still. Eli came in behind her and stopped when he saw her looking. Something moved across his face that she could not name. "That's Ruth," he said quietly. "My wife." "I know," Clara said, though she didn't know what else to say. He nodded once and went to see about the horse. Clara stood there for a moment longer, just her and the portrait and the small, steady flame. She understood right then that she had not come here to fill an empty place. She had come here to live beside a grief that had not finished yet. And the question she would spend the next several weeks asking herself was whether she was strong enough for that, and whether she even wanted to try. She met Rose the next morning. The little girl was sitting at the kitchen table when Clara came downstairs before dawn, still in her nightgown, with hair that had clearly not been brushed in a day or two, eating a biscuit very seriously with both hands. She looked up at Clara with her father's eyes, dark, careful, measuring. Clara sat down across from her and poured herself a cup of coffee and said good morning and did not make a fuss. Rose watched her for a long moment. Then she went back to her biscuit. That was the beginning of something, though neither of them knew it yet. The first 2 weeks were not easy. Eli and Clara were polite to each other the way strangers in a boarding house are polite, careful and courteous, and never quite comfortable. They had been married by the town judge the morning after Clara arrived, a short, quiet ceremony with 2 witnesses from town that felt more like signing a deed than starting a life. They had separate rooms. They had separate silences. They passed each other in the kitchen and the hallway with small nods and small words and a great deal of careful distance. Clara threw herself into the work of the house. She cooked. She cleaned. She spent time with Rose every day, reading to her from a small stack of books she found on the parlor shelf, or sitting with her on the porch watching the horses in pasture, or helping her tend the small patch of flowers Rose had planted near the garden gate. Rose did not speak much, but she watched Clara with those careful dark eyes, and sometimes at the end of the day she would sit close to Clara on the porch swing, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and that felt like something that mattered. The thing about the portrait was that it was not just a portrait. There were other things. Ruth's apron still hanging on the kitchen hook, worn soft with use. Ruth's Bible on the bedside table in the room Clara was told used to be theirs. Ruth's handwriting on the recipe cards tucked into the kitchen drawer. Little pieces of a woman scattered to the house like breadcrumbs, and Clara kept finding them. She did not resent Ruth. She couldn't. The woman was dead and she had clearly been loved, and there was nothing wrong with that. But she was starting to wonder whether Eli had ever really considered what it would feel like to be the woman who came after. She asked him about it one evening when the house was quiet. Rose was in bed. The fire was low, and Eli was sitting at the table with the ranch ledger open in front of him, though he didn't seem to be reading it. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said. He looked up. "When you placed that advertisement, what exactly were you hoping for?" He was quiet for a moment. "Someone to help with Rose," he said. "Someone to keep the house." "I didn't think I was asking for more than that." Clara nodded slowly. "And that's still all you're asking for?" He looked at her for a long time, and she could not read what was in his eyes. "I don't rightly know," he said finally, and that was more honest than most things she had heard in her life. She appreciated the honesty, but she lay awake that night for a long time. Then came the morning in October when everything shifted. Clara had gone out early to the garden. The air had that cold, sharp edge that meant real winter was not far off, and she was trying to get the last of the root vegetables in before the ground froze hard. She was kneeling in the dirt, pulling up parsnips, when she heard the sound. Small. "Hi." Very frightened. She stood up and looked toward the creek. Rose was standing on the far bank, maybe 30 feet from where the water ran fast and dark over stones, and she was not moving. She was just standing there with her arms straight at her sides and her little face white as paper. On the near side of the creek, between Rose and the path back to the house, a large dog was standing, not growling exactly, but stiff and alert and strange-eyed in a way that meant something was not right with the animal. Clara did not think. She just moved. She grabbed the handle of the spade she had been using and walked toward the dog, slow and steady, making herself big, speaking in a low, firm voice, keeping herself between the dog and where Rose would need to come. The dog fixed its eyes on her, then backed off uncertain and turned and disappeared into the brush along the creek bank. Clara crossed the Rose in 3 long steps and crouched down, and the little girl flew into her arms, so hard it nearly knocked her over. Rose was shaking. Clara held her tight and stroked her hair and said, "It's all right. You're all right. I've got you." The same words over and over like a song without music. And then, pressed up against Clara's shoulder, in a small, muffled voice that Clara had to hold her breath to hear, Rose said, "Mama," not asking, not calling out, just a word that had been sitting inside her for 8 months, finally finding somewhere safe to land. Clara closed her eyes. She did not correct her. She just held on tighter. Eli found them still sitting by the creek bank when he came looking. He had seen them from the ridge and ridden down, and now he stood a few feet away looking at his daughter in Clara's arms with an expression on his face that Clara had never seen from him before. Not the careful, distant look. Not the measured ranch ledger look. Something older and raw and very much alive. He did not say a word. He sat down in the dirt beside them and put his hand on his daughter's back, and the 3 of them sat there by the cold creek in the pale October morning for a long time. That night after Rose was in bed, Eli came to find Clara on the porch. He stood next to her at the railing looking out at the dark land and the stars, and he said, "What she called you today." "I know," Clara said quietly. "Did it bother you?" "No," she said, and then after a pause, "Did it bother you?" He was quiet for a long time, long enough that the night sounds of the ranch settled around them, wind in the grass, a horse shifting in the barn, the creek running somewhere in the dark. "Ruth died 11 months ago," he said at last. "She was sick for a long time before that. I watched her go piece by piece, and I couldn't stop it, and I have not known what to do with that. I thought if I just kept everything the way it was, kept her things, kept her picture, kept everything still, it would hurt less." He paused. "It didn't." Clara waited. "I didn't think much about what it would be like for you," he said, "coming here into all of that. I should have." He turned and looked at her then, really looked at her, the way he had not quite let himself do since she arrived. "I'm sorry for that, Clara." She had not expected the apology. She had not known she needed it until she heard it. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded, looked back at the stars. "She's been sleeping better," he said after a moment. "Rose, since you came. She's a good girl. She is." His voice was soft with it. The love a father has that he can't always find the words for. She needs someone who stays. Clara looked at him. "I'm not going anywhere, Eli." He turned back to look at her. That careful measuring look again. But something in it was different now. Softer, like a door not all the way closed. "I know," he said. And this time he meant more than just the practical fact of her presence. Clara could hear it. She went back inside. But she stood at her bedroom window for a long time, watching the night over the ranch. And for the first time in a very long time, she did not feel like she was standing at the edge of somewhere she did not belong. She felt like she was already inside. The hardest moment came 3 weeks later. Eli's older brother, Thomas, rode in from Billings with his wife Frances, and a manner about him that told Clara immediately he was the kind of man who had strong opinions about other people's lives. He walked through the house with his hat still on his head, looked at Clara the way men like him look at mail-order brides, like a purchase they're deciding whether to return, and spent dinner talking at Eli about the ranch as though Clara was not sitting at the same table. Frances was not cruel, just absent in the particular way of women who have learned not to disturb their husbands' arrangements. After dinner, Thomas found a moment alone with Clara in the kitchen and said, without particular cruelty but with great confidence, "My brother's too proud to say it, but this arrangement is not what Ruth would have wanted for Rose. A stranger woman raising her daughter, a marriage of convenience dressed up like something real." He looked at her steadily. "I expect you know the girl needs proper family." Clara set down the dish she was drying. She looked at Thomas Holt with a steadiness she had earned from 30 years of people making her feel small. "With respect," she said, "your brother's daughter wrapped her arms around me and held on for dear life, and I held on back. Whatever you call that, Mr. Holt, I call it real." She picked up the dish again and finished drying it. Thomas left the next morning. He did not say goodbye to Clara, but Frances, quiet Frances, stopped at the door and pressed Clara's hand briefly and gave her a small look that said more than anything she had spoken aloud the whole visit. That evening Eli asked her what Thomas had said. She told him. Eli stood in the kitchen doorway for a long moment. Then he said, "He's wrong." "I know," Clara said. "I want you to know I know," he said, which was different, which mattered. December came cold and white, and the ranch pulled inward the way places do in winter, all firelight and close quarters and the particular intimacy of shared cold mornings. Clara and Eli found a rhythm together that had not been planned but had arrived anyway, the way the best things sometimes do. He told her things in the evenings, about the ranch, about Silver Creek, about his years here. Small pieces of himself offered carefully like kindling on a new fire, not too much at once. She told him things, too, about St. Louis, about Gerald, about the boarding house and the aunts, and the years of being just a little too much trouble for everywhere she landed. He listened the way quiet men listen, completely, without interruption. And when she finished, he said, "That man was a fool, and they were wrong about you." Simply, like a fact about the weather. She had to look away. Rose drew them both a picture that December. Clara found on the kitchen table one morning 3 figures done in brown crayon on the back of a flour sack paper. A tall figure and a smaller tall figure and a very small round figure between them, all holding hands. Underneath, in Rose's laborious, careful letters, the word home. Clara sat down at the table and held that piece of paper and let herself cry quietly, which she had not done in a long time. When Eli came in from the cold and found her there, he did not ask. He just poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from her and waited, and that was more comfort than any word he could have offered. It was Christmas Eve when he told her. They were sitting by the fire after Rose was in bed, the house quiet and smelling of pine and something Clara had baked that afternoon, and Eli was looking at the fire with the expression she had come to recognize as the one that meant he was working up to something. "When I wrote that advertisement," he said slowly, "I told myself it was practical, for Rose, for the ranch. I told myself feelings didn't have anything to do with it." Clara waited. "I was wrong about that." He looked at her then, steady and direct and very much himself. "I don't know when it changed. Maybe when you walked toward that dog with a spade, without even thinking twice. Maybe before that." He paused. "I just know that this house feels different with you in it. I feel different. And I don't think that's practical." Clara looked at him for a long moment. This careful, quiet man with his worn coat and his honest mud and his grief that he had carried without making a show of it. This man who listened completely and said true things and loved his daughter in the wordless, bone-deep way that good fathers do. "Eli," she said softly, "I'm not asking you to forget the way you came here," he said. "I'm not asking you to pretend any of this was ordinary. I'm just asking if maybe you might be willing to let it be something real." She thought about the train ride and the carpet bag and the advertisement in the back of the church bulletin. She thought about Gerald and the aunts and the boarding house and every place that had not been hers. She thought about Rose's drawing on the flour sack paper. 3 figures holding hands, and the word home underneath. "I think," she said, "it already is." He reached across the small space between them and took her hand, and she let him. And they sat like that by the fire for a long time while the snow fell quiet and steady outside, and the ranch rested in its winter stillness. And for the first time in Clara Weston's life, she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She did not feel like a woman at the edge of somewhere anymore. She felt like a woman who had found the inside at last. On Christmas morning, Rose came downstairs and found them both already in the kitchen. Clara at the stove and Eli at the table with his coffee, and the little girl stopped in the doorway and looked at them both with those careful dark eyes. Then she walked to Clara and took her hand and said, clear as the winter morning, "Mama, can we have pancakes?" Clara looked at Eli over the child's head. He was looking back at her. That door was all the way open now. "Yes," Clara said softly, squeezing Rose's small hand. "We can have pancakes." And outside the snow kept falling over the ranch in Silver Creek, Montana, soft and clean and covering everything that had been cold and bare with something that looked, if you were willing to see it that way, a great deal like a beginning. If this story found its way to your heart today, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me what part moved you the most, and tell me where in the world you are watching from right now. There are listeners from so many beautiful places, and it means everything to know you are there. And if you are new here and you want more slow, emotional Western romance stories about healing and belonging and love that feels like coming home, please subscribe and ring that bell. A new story is always waiting for you here. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, it is never too late to find where you belong.